Hello people of YouTube, my name is JD Shadow. This is a special report, your news and views program about geek culture and video games on YouTube. Cut up in the show today, a single story, but I think it deserves a lot of importance. The outrage over the Usagi and Mamoru sex scene in Sailor Moon Crystal Act 19 had a few people feeling uncomfortable, though we're going to explore all avenues and all angles of this particular discussion and how it compares to some of the other controversies that have happened recently as it pertains to artistic freedom and whether or not it should have been left in. We will explore all avenues of this. My name is JD Shadow and the special report starts right now. Well, if you haven't seen Sailor Moon Crystal Act 19 yet, the Time Warp Sailor Pluto, first of all, go watch it. It is a tremendous episode. I highly recommend it for anybody who has not seen it. If you want a reaction, go watch my Act 19 video. It is now up on YouTube. However, there is one particular scene that is getting a lot of feedback and a lot of reaction. It is the scene in which Mamoru and Usagi are in Mamoru's loft and they are watching after Chibi-Yusa. In this scene, Usagi says that she is jealous of Chibi-Yusa even though Mamoru is right in saying that she is just in elementary school. When Usagi says it is silly of her to be so jealous of a 14-year-old, Mamoru sees Usagi's image starting to dissipate right in front of him. He grabs her in order to make sure that he keeps her safe in his arms. And as one thing leads to another, all of a sudden you see that Mamoru is lying on top of Usagi, fast asleep, with Usagi probably as happy as can be. Obviously, the implied act that they had committed was of a sexual nature. And later on, when they confront Chibi-Yusa, Mamoru is putting a white button-up shirt over Usagi in order to further the implication that a sexual act was indeed performed. Now, this had made many people squeamish about the actual scene, although there are different angles to discuss into how things were made to be uncomfortable. Amber, one of my best friends on YouTube, Amber, otherwise known as Caleb Moon, was the biggest critic about this particular scene, and she had claimed to be making the video. When and if that comes onto YouTube, I will post a link into the description below this video. However, according to her, she had said that this scene would put the impression into younger minds that sex at that age would be okay in order to perform. She was no doubt uncomfortable with the scene being put into the story. Or Peachy just said that the scene actually looked weird with the way that Mamoru was laying on top of Usagi. I was not as offended by it. I was actually okay by the actual scene, and I didn't respond in the way that some others did because of something that we will cover when we get to the viewpoints about this particular topic. However, my whole implication was the scene that happened just before, in which Usagi was jealous of Chibi-Yusa and she explained her reasoning. Of course, this is something in the form of jealousy working in odd ways. Jealousy has a major way of working, an odd way of working, and shouldn't be too surprised that even if she's a little girl, even if she's someone who is just 6 years of age, even if she is just in elementary school, you can probably still be jealous of someone and not have it be because of a sexual nature. Some others had said that the actual scene itself was indeed of a beautiful setting and it didn't seem as though they were shoehorning it in. It seemed as though they really were trying to make the scene as careful as possible in order to not give the wrong impression. Now, keep in mind that this particular scene is indeed in the manga. There are 3 pages of panels that depict of a sexual act possibly taking place. However, there is no removal of any clothes except for the implication of when Mamoru covers Usagi's torso with that white shirt. Now, of course, this would not be a very big story if it wasn't for a few other controversies that have stemmed recently, which might be comparable to what is happening with this particular new controversy about the scene in Sailor Moon Crystal. First of all, the Pillars of Eternity tombstone controversy. If you have no idea what we are talking about, the whole issue is that there was a limerick that somebody who donated $500 to Obsidian Software's Kickstarter campaign, which it was one of the rewards for donating that much. The actual limerick in question read, quote, "Here lies Firedorn, a hero in bed. He once was alive, but now he's dead. The last woman he bedded turned out a man, and crying in shame off a cliff he ran." Of course, this sparked a firestorm, which also got one particular YouTuber, which you probably would know of, John Bain, otherwise known as Total Biscuit, in order to say that they should keep the limerick in because it was depiction of the actual world in which the storyline was set in. This sparked some controversy about his own comics, with the hashtag of "Shut the fuck up Total Biscuit" spreading around on Twitter. Obsidian Software later on decided to remove the controversial limerick and replace it with another limerick from the guy who wrote the first one, which takes a jab at the people who were complaining about the original limerick. There's also the situation about the Batgirl cover. Now, if you do not know what this is about, there was a cover on a recent Batgirl comic book in which the Joker is holding Batgirl hostage with a gun pointed to her and her face already carved in the shape of the Joker's smile. This got a lot of people up in arms, and later on we learned that they were going to change the cover there as well. Now, before I go any further, please be advised that there are going to be some strong opinions on both sides of this whole debate. I implore everyone to first of all view all of our opinions about this particular scene and to keep an open mind when you listen to some of the opinions that have been formed, and to make sure that when you form your own opinion that you respect those people who might have a different opinion than your own. Also, I invite everyone to please leave a comment down below and tell me what you think about this particular scene, but please keep it as a mature debate. Let's not get into the childish nature that some of these debates will sometimes go into. Okay, so let's get to the actual scene of Usagi and Mamoru. According to Japanese law and according to the penal code, the age of consent in Japan is 13 years old. However, there are some issues to be had there in the form of who they are legally allowed to have sex with. It would be other 13 to 17-year-olds unless the actual person in question, who is over age 18 and above, is involved in a serious romantic relationship with the younger person. There is a lot of fine print to be had there, and if you want to view someone else who knows a good bit about the Japanese culture and laws, the nostalgia critic Doug Walker in his Sailor Moon review also pointed the exact same thing out, and the link to his review will be in the description below this video. Also, before we go any further, keep in mind that according to the Sailor Moon wiki, Mamoru Chiba is still in the second arc, the Black Moon arc, 17 years of age, which means that even if you factor that in, he is still legally able to engage in sexual intercourse with a 14-year-old and not be breaking any penal codes in Japan. Now, we are not talking about whether or not it is lawful in order to bed a younger person in Japan. We are actually talking about the moral compass in all of this, the court of public opinion. If we were to look at this through the eyes of an American viewing an Americanized show, then perhaps there would be some cause for concern. Of course, we would view this as statutory rape, even though Mamoru is still 17 years of age as of the Black Moon arc. This is because as Americans, and as an American myself, we are used to a certain amount of laws, a certain kind of law in which a person who is not of the age of consent is not allowed to have sex with somebody of a older age, and if so, it would be viewed as statutory rape regardless of whether or not it was consensual or otherwise. Now, you can have your own opinion about whether or not a consensual act of sexual intercourse should be considered statutory rape or not, but the fact of the matter is that in many states, and probably in the federal stance as well, it would be considered as such. Does that mean that it is not feasible for two people in order to engage in sexual intercourse despite those laws? I think it is not. It is not infeasible to have such things happen. We act on impulses, we act on our hearts, and maybe not with our minds when we think about love and about things of that nature. We have the tendency to not think before we act, and Usagi acts on actual impulse. Usagi is one of those characters who just does it without even thinking twice about doing a certain thing. In that sense, it is not out of character for her in order to decide to engage in an act such as this. But this is a particular particularly intense scene. This is a particularly serious act in order for her to engage in. This is not just her going to an arcade or her spending money on stuff that she doesn't need or whatever of the sort. This is her engaging in an act in which would have serious repercussions if they did not take responsibility in the act of itself. Then, of course, is the impression that it would leave on young women. And of course, this is something that Amber had actually expressed concern about. And I can see where she's coming from as well. If a young girl were to watch this and were to think that sexual acts on an older person or sex in general at that age would be okay, I would take some exception to that. I would be sure that I would make sure that it was done in a responsible way before I would let anybody watch that. However, let's play devil's advocate here for just a second. Should we shield a person or a younger person from that aspect of life? And should we at some point know that at some point they are going to learn what sex is? And is it going to be better for a person of that age to learn about sex in a more responsible way than if they watch, say, a pornographic video or something from bazaars or anything else of that sort? I think a way in which you can actually talk about the scene in question with the people who watched it, with the younger people who did watch it, is a better way in order to engage in a conversation and have something be taken out of it. Instead of just saying to shield people from that particular scene, to be able to discuss the scene with younger people in order to say as to why they had sex, why were they doing what they did, why did they decide that it was the right time, and why did she do that at the age that she did. I think in that sense we can safely have a discussion as to whether or not that particular scene can actually be educational instead of just being immoral. But then comes the act of whether or not Naoko Takeuchi should be ashamed to have this scene in her manga in the first place. This goes into artistic freedom. This goes into creative freedom, and this is where I think that we have to also examine the Pillars of Eternity tombstone and also the Batgirl cover. There is a question as to whether or not a person of a creative statue is allowed to have what they want in their works as long as it's within the context of the story that they are creating and not feel ashamed. Many times a creator or an artist will put something into their story which means a good bit to them, and it is something that they want to be able to tell in the way that they see comfortable in doing. Naoko Takeuchi has always been able to put her own experiences into the Sailor Moon franchise. One of the many ways that she did this is the notion of adding a perverted grandfather for Rei, because she was working in a shrine and the head of the shrine had always hit on her. And of course, many of Usagi's family members were also depictions of the family members that Naoko Takeuchi had when growing up. So it is not outside a feasible realm in order to think that perhaps something like this had also happened within her life and she wanted to share that story. This is something that everybody who has always created a story within their lifetime had actually done. They had put their own experiences into their works and they want to share what they went through with the people who are watching in order to say, hey, this might not be for you. This is something that I went through. Maybe you should think twice before engaging in that same act. And there were also stories when I was writing fan fiction that I felt uncomfortable with. There's a backlog story that I have in which one of the characters is in the process of being raped. Now, is it something that makes me feel uncomfortable in writing? Of course it does. Who wants to see somebody get raped? Who wants to see that? However, at the same time, would that be the intended feeling that you want the reader to have? Is that the intended reaction you want somebody to get out of that particular scene? Remember, the story is always supposed to be immersive. It's supposed to put you right into the action with the person who you are watching. And in that sense, if someone is trying to make you feel uncomfortable because they want to show that the act is uncomfortable to watch, then they have actually succeeded. They have actually been successful at elicting a particular response out of you. But is it the response that is intended? In other words, is the response one that you're going to relate to in terms of wanting the character to overcome it because you feel as if you connect to that particular character, or is it something that's going to make you feel uncomfortable in a way that you need trigger warnings because it triggers something inside of you. You don't want to actually see someone else go through it because it reminds you of what you went through. That is where the line, I think, would get kind of blurred, because you never know how somebody is actually going to respond, how somebody is going to react to a particular scene when they see it. If a rape victim were to actually see someone else getting raped, it might elect some triggers in what they went through. But at the same time, if they can relate to that particular character, and if the scene is handled in such a way that it's responsible, then you could probably see that that rape victim who sees that particular scene will be able to know that they are not alone and they can get help wherever they need it, because other people have gone through the same thing and they can support those kinds of people. Of course, there's always a possibility that it could be shoehorned in just for a shock value or not have any real worth in the actual story, and that's when you get a situation in which you are going to have people, rightfully so, complain about it. You're going to have those types of things, but where do you draw the line? And is the line really clear as to what is constituting as something within context and is handled responsibly versus something that is just there shoehorned in for shock value? Thankfully, in the case of shoehorned in for shock value, the line is not as severely blurred. Many people in fact, could probably know when something is actually just put in there just for the sake of putting it in there. When you actually put it in to where you want to elect a particular response because it is a part of the story and a part of the actual world that they are living in, that's when you get a much more blurred line. Sure, a scene might make you feel uncomfortable, but is it making you feel uncomfortable because you don't want anyone else to actually see the scene, or does it make you feel uncomfortable because you're not quite sure how to look at the characters that are participating in that action? And does that constitute for a reason to censor that particular piece of art? When we talk about censorship, that is a big issue as well. Do we as a society keep that sort of thing away from everybody's eyeballs just because we don't like a particular scene as an individual? We're not sure how to really discuss it with another person, so we just don't want it to be in there at all. Now, if I was a parent and I had a 13-year-old girl and I saw that she was watching a scene like that, if I was seeing that she was watching that and was getting some ideas from that, I might feel a little bit uncomfortable about that, but at the same time, I would rather that 13-year-old girl learn from a show in which the two people who are engaging in the act are deeply in love with each other and are acting in a mature manner, as opposed to a show which does not, that has people just having sex for the sake of having sex, or raping people for the sake of doing it without any real context to it, or something but ears or something like that. I would rather have him learn from a show that handles the subject matter with a bit of class, with a bit of maturity. And in terms of SM Crystal, they handled it with a bit of maturity, with a bit of class, in having two people who sincerely do love each other and they are consensually in love with each other to commit that act. Now, granted, Amber is correct, and maybe some people will not be comfortable in younger girls watching that particular scene and then getting some ideas from it. But would you rather have them have ideas from a show that actually handles it with a bit of class and maturity, as opposed to, again, a porn site or somebody who is just having sex for the sake of doing it and not really understanding the consequences that go along with it? Remember, we are living in a society where people are going to learn about sex at a much earlier age than some of us that are older ever did. And people are having sex at a much younger age than we ever did. Now, is that the fault of the show? Of course it's not. It may be easy to blame the show for something like that, but keep in mind that it's just one tiny small aspect of a much bigger picture. You're trying to see the forest from the trees at that point in time. And keep in mind that a lot of children are going to be much smarter than we ever were at that age as well. It's not as if they're not thinking about it. It's not as if they're not concerned about the safety. If we are going to be responsible people, we should instead learn how to talk with our kids, talk with children about what these kinds of things are and the consequences that come along with it. We should be a lot more responsible as parents to teach children and teens the consequences of sexual intercourse and what could come from that. I think we have responsibility that I think we've kind of lost in society, and that might not be the fault of anybody else other than our own self-consciousness in a time when a lot of parents are seeing television as the babysitters to their children. I mean, we should be concerned about what our children do watch much, but at the same time, we shouldn't be shielding children from what life is like. We should be shielding children from certain aspects of things that we see at the television shows. Instead of trying to absolutely censor anybody from that particular artistic content, we should be allowing our children to discuss the show in order to talk about just what exactly they've seen. Are they somebody who will be engaging in that sort of act? Is that something that they would be interested in? Is that something that they would be looking into? Hopefully not, but at the same time, that's something of a parent's guide or a parent's questioning guide that you can actually have a teachable moment with their kids. It's not something you have to censor. Even though, yeah, they might have the idea of sexual intercourse at that age, it is not like they are going to actually engage in it. Maybe it's something that they're not interested in at that point in time. We take for granted how smart children are at this age. We take for granted a lot about what children will actually think about at that point of age. Yeah, they might want to experiment at some point in time, but it's not like they're going to just go out and screw the first person they see just because they saw it on the TV. Children are smart. They're smarter than what we think. And maybe the artistic vision of Naoko Takeuchi is to, hey, I engaged in sexual intercourse at that age in the past, and I don't know if she ever did or not. I have no idea. But if she would ever to do that and put that into her stories, perhaps that is a sign from her to say, hey, I went through this at that point in time too. If you're going to do that sort of thing at this age, make sure that you are doing it with someone you truly do care about. And even in that sense, we're still talking about a Japanese person. We're still talking about two people who are Japanese, and as such, they are growing up under Japanese customs and laws and cultures. And even though we as Americans or in other parts of the country might see that as uncomfortable, to Japanese people, that's probably normal. That is probably just as normal as us seeing two adults screwing each other as well. And maybe to Japanese people, our laws and customs may be draconian to them. You never know how they feel about our laws and cultures. It's just an opinion. In order to rightfully discuss these particular scenes in the Japanese anime, we have to consider how much influence Japanese laws and customs have on that particular anime. We can say that the anime is seen worldwide, but remember, it's a Japanese anime. It is not a Canadian cartoon. It's not an American cartoon. It's not a UK cartoon. It's a Japanese anime. And as such, the only real laws that those Japanese animators or those Japanese creators are going to understand to heart that they really do know something about are the Japanese laws. We can't ask them to do anything more than that. So even if we feel uncomfortable with us watching that particular scene take place, remember, to Japanese people, that's probably pretty normal for two people of that age difference in order to have sexual intercourse. That is perfectly normal, at least to them. And even though it might be uncomfortable to us, we're not the ones that created it. It was a Japanese person who grew up knowing of Japanese laws that created it. And as such, perhaps we need to look a little bit more into the Japanese customs and the Japanese laws before we go and judge anything of that sort. And I know that's going to be a bitter pill to swallow for some people, and I apologize if it seems like it is, and it seems like I'm trying to dog on people's uncomfortability with that particular scene, but be it as it may, that is just something that I think we have to explore a little bit further before we go past judgment on anybody to make a scene such as that. However, there are a few other examples that I brought to the table, and let me go into those because I think because I brought them up, I should at the very least bring my thoughts upon those matters. First of all, the Batgirl cover. I don't think it should have been changed because I know the character of the Joker. He tortures about everybody. He has just gotten to everybody within the Batman continuum. The Joker is supposed to be a terrifying person. It's supposed to have a psychotic nature to it. Just about every single Batman character imaginable has been caught by the Joker at some point in time. Does that mean that the cover is going to be triggersome to some people? It might be for some people, but keep in mind that the Joker is one of of those iconic villains that has just wreaked havoc and has captured just about everybody in the Batman universe. So I don't think it's quite fair in order to judge that cover based upon just the fact that it's Batgirl in that particular scene. However, in the case of the Pillars of Eternity tombstone, I'm kind of on the fence about that. Here's the thing about that. The whole idea of the tombstone is supposed to be within the universe of the timeline that the game is set in. At the same time, however, we don't know the exact mindset that the person who submitted that particular limerick had when he created it. Is he actually a transphobic person? Is it just something that's making fun of the transphobic person and is actually just saying that transphobia is wrong? We really don't have a clue as to whether or not the person who created it is actually a transphobic person. And as such, I think it was within Obsidian's best interest in order to change it because they really did know. They had no way of really knowing whether or not the person who made it was going to make it to be transphobic, or in order to just put that into the context of the setting in which the game was set in. If it was Obsidian that's made that particular limerick, then there might be some difference of opinion in that, but because it was sent in by a backer through Kickstarter, you don't know what exactly the mindset would be. So even though you might not agree with the removal, even though you might think Obsidian was in the wrong for removing it, you don't know the mindset. You really don't know when you're dealing with somebody who is submitting something for you because they got the reward, even though it is a reward that not many people would be able to reach the $500 mark, because there is a sense of the unknown in that particular limerick. It is much safer for Obsidian to say we might want this changed instead of leaving it in there and risk having a limerick by an actual transphobic person. Now, is the person transphobic? I don't know. I don't know one way or the other, but you shouldn't really take that risk. And even though I know where both sides are coming from, I'm more or less on the fence about whether or not they should have changed that to begin with. I think it was just in their best interest to do it because you don't know the mindset of the person. However, the act of artistic freedom, the act of artistic creativity and creative freedom should be allowed to exist regardless of whether or not we are necessarily uncomfortable with a particular aspect of the story, because we don't know what exactly the creator is actually trying to elicit out of us. Are they trying to elicit that particular response? And if so, why would they want to do that? Is it to immerse us even further into the story, or is it just for shock value? I think we probably can understand what is shock value and what is just immersion into a world in which that kind of thing could actually happen. And in the case of Usagi and Mamoru, it was a beautiful scene. It was beautifully done. It was maturely done. And I think personally, this is just my opinion, that it was not something that should have been that alarming to some people. I thought it was well done and handled with a bit of class, unless of course you count the little thing about how Mamoru was laying on top of Usagi, which was what the hell was going on there. But in any event, that's just my opinion, and again, I would like to know what you guys think. Leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to respond to you. I can't guarantee I'm going to respond to every single person, but I'll try my best. But please be sure to keep it at a mature level. We do not need any screaming. We don't need any name calling or labeling. And with that having been said, that's going to do it for this edition of the special report. And once again, please be advised that Amber is probably going to do her own video about this subject, and she'll have a much different opinion than my own. I'm pretty sure she will. If and when that comes onto her channel, I will be the first to link you in the description below this video to her video, and I elect for everybody to watch and listen to both of our opinions when that happens, and I would elect for people to watch both of the videos in order to get a fair assessment of both sides of the story and to come up with your own conclusion. I would love people to be able to get both sides of a particular issue, and this is a truly hot button issue. I wouldn't mind actually getting some other reactors together and maybe doing a shadowcast about this particular subject, because I believe it deserves even more discussion about this particular thing and where a series like this could go from there once they delve down that path. And if you're a reactor who would be interested in something like that, by all means leave a comment down below as well, and we'll see what we can do about that. I would love to be able to discuss this with other people. I wouldn't mind the debate. I wouldn't mind if people disagree with me, as long as they're respectful about it. That's going to do it for this edition of the Special Report. My name is JD Shadow, and that just happened.